Monarch: Legacy of Monsters is a show that, when it was first announced, I didn't really care about it one way or the other. I saw the promotional stills and just sort of shrugged my shoulders and moved on with my life. I am notoriously bad with TV shows. Like, off the top of my head, I can name only a handful of shows that I've actually watched every single episode of. Breaking Bad, Twin Peaks, Community, Evangelion, and regular show. But this is Godzilla, my one hyper-fixation in life. You would think there would be some level of excitement towards this from me, but I just kind of felt nothing. I think a lot of that has to do with it being released on a very mid-streaming service, while also being put out at the same time as Godzilla Minus One. And then a few months later, Godzilla X Kong came out, so it sort of got lost in the shuffle. Regardless, I got a subscription to Apple TV Plus and then proceeded to spend an entire year not even using it, except to watch Peter Jackson's King Kong from 2005. While on Thanksgiving break, yes, that is how long it took me to make this video, I decided to finally sit down and give it a watch with my dad. He likes Kurt Russell movies, I like Godzilla, it's a match made in heaven. So after watching all 10 episodes, what did I think? Well, first, I think we actually have to go through the entire plot of the first season so that you understand all of my praises and all of my gripes. But we're going to be doing this in chronological order. The show jumps around a lot from the 1950s to modern day, well, rather 2015. So I actually just rewrote the entire thing so that everything is in chronological order in terms of starting in the 50s and going all the way to 2015. I felt like if I just went, okay, so in episode 1, it would have just been kind of weird. So this is the actual official timeline of the show. Major spoilers ahead in 3, 2, 1. In 1952, Colonel Leland Shaw is assigned to escort scientist Keiko Mura to the Philippines, where unusual radiation readings are reported. There they meet Bill Randa, a Navy officer investigating legends of a fire-breathing dragon. Together, they find the wreckage of the USS Lawton. Inside the wreck, they discover corpses and encounter a Titan, the Ion Dragon, which emits radiation-based fire. Shaw saves Bill and Keiko, and the three narrowly escape the Titan. By 1954, Shaw officially joins Monarch, a secretive organization formed to study and manage the emerging Titan threat. He, Bill, and Keiko investigate Godzilla, whose footprint is discovered in Japan. They attempt to lure him out using uranium, but the military uses their operation to deploy a nuclear bomb in the Castle Bravo test at Bikini Atoll. Though the bomb detonates, Godzilla survives, and the test only serves to provoke him. This failure prompts Shaw's superiors to give Monarch free rein and funding to study the Titans. Bill discovers that the Titans evade detection by traveling through an underground network known as the Hollow Earth. During this time, Keiko reveals that she is a widow raising her young son Hiroshi. Bill offers to adopt Hiroshi, and this ends up strengthening their bond together. Later that year, Keiko and Bill collaborate with Japanese scientist Suzuki, who builds a Titan lure capable of drawing Titans to the surface. They test the lure in Japan, but are horrified when Godzilla appears and destroys it. Meanwhile, Shaw abandons a budget meeting to join Keiko and Bill in Japan. He does this because he has feelings for Keiko. In 1959, the group follows radiation readings to Kazakhstan. There, they discover a massive hole drilled into the earth near a power plant, leading to a cavern filled with eggs belonging to insectoid titans called endoswarmers. While investigating, Keiko and Shaw rappel down into the caverns. The eggs hatch and the endoswarmer larvae drag Keiko into the depths. Shaw is unable to save her, and her apparent death devastates both him and Bill. By 1962, Shaw leads Operation Hourglass, a risky Monarch mission into the Hollow Earth to stabilize a rift caused by Titan activity. Suzuki's lure is used to trigger a partial Titan emergence, but the rift destabilizes, stranding Shaw and his team in the Hollow Earth. His team is killed by an Ion Dragon, but Shaw survives, after being ejected back to the surface through the collapsing rift. Shaw awakens in 1982 in a Monarch medical facility. He learns that Monarch has deprioritized Titan research, with Hiroshi, who's now an adult, telling him that Bill died, and, of course, we the audience know he died on Skull Island. Disillusioned and bitter, Shaw attempts multiple escapes, but is placed under what is essentially house arrest. Kate Randa's investigation into her father, Hiroshi, begins in the wake of Godzilla's 2014 battle in San Francisco. In Tokyo, she discovers that she has a half-brother named Kentaro, and they also discover files belonging to their grandfather, Bill Randa. Joined by May, they unravel Monarch's history and Hiroshi's connection to Titan research. Monarch operatives Tim and Duval pursue them as they travel across Japan, Alaska, and Africa, encountering titans like the Frostvark and evidence of the Hollow Earth. Shaw, now a bitter ex-Monarch agent, joins the group but keeps his motives hidden. He helps guide them to a rift to the Hollow Earth, where they find Hiroshi, who has been using the Titan lure that Suzuki created to investigate Titan activity. Shaw plans to seal the rift to prevent further Titan incursions, believing that this will restore balance. After a conflict in Kazakhstan, the group ends up in Hollow Earth, where they are reconnected with Keiko, who is still alive and well at this time. Despite being probably 90 years old, she hasn't really aged a day, and that's because time passes differently in Hollow Earth. The group ends up battling an ion dragon and an endoswarmer. Shaw sacrifices himself by reconnecting damaged equipment, allowing the rest of the characters to escape. Godzilla emerges during the battle, defeating the Ion Dragon and stabilizing the rift. The season ends with Hiroshi, Kate, Kentaro, and Keiko reuniting at an Apex Cybernetics facility on Skull Island, and this leads directly into the events of Godzilla vs. Kong. Monarch Legacy of Monsters does everything I hoped for in terms of expanding the world of the Monsterverse. Not just by introducing new titans, but by filling in the gaps created by the very jumbled continuity of the films, which are constantly being retconned over and over and over again. Seriously, I am convinced that the Monsterverse has the worst continuity in any current cinematic universe right now. Take Godzilla King of the Monsters from 2019, for example. One of my biggest gripes with that movie was how Monarch went from being this enigmatic, shadowy CIA type of organization, as established in Godzilla 2014 and Kong Skull Island, to a blatant knockoff of Marvel's S.H.I.E.L.D., complete with high-tech gadgets and sprawling global facilities. It felt like a drastic tonal shift with zero setup. Thankfully, Monarch Legacy of Monsters manages to bridge this gap in a way that feels much more organic. By exploring Monarch's origins and its gradual evolution, the show makes this transformation into an MCU-esque organization feel much smoother. Instead of springing it on us, the show takes the time to build the connective tissue between the gritty, secretive group of Titan hunters that we first met in 2014 and the glossy, bureaucratic operation that we see later. That sense of progression is key to what makes Monarch Legacy of Monsters work so well. The show leans heavily into Monarch's early portrayal as a shadowy government organization, and it nails that tone for most of its runtime. For me, that's when Monarch is at its most fascinating, when it's portrayed as this covert CIA black site. Sure, it does eventually become a ripoff of S.H.I.E.L.D., but at least this time, we are shown how that happens, and it's far more satisfying than the abrupt shift in King of the Monsters, where Monarch suddenly has helicarriers and sprawling facilities and what felt like an unlimited budget. That said, not everything the show tackles lands as neatly. The depiction of Hollow Earth, for instance, left me scratching my head. The mechanics of it seem wildly inconsistent with what we've seen in the films. In Godzilla vs. Kong, the characters venture into Hollow Earth with no mention of any time distortions. Yet in Monarch Legacy of Monsters, we have Keiko entering Hollow Earth in 1959 only to emerge in 2015 without aging a day. Because apparently, time works differently there. Is this supposed to be a new layer or a new dimension of Hollow Earth, another retcon, or just a case of Monarch Legacy of Monsters introducing its own set of rules? I think fans are even kind of confused on what this is supposed to be. I did a podcast recently where I talked about that Hollow Earth aspect of this show, and yeah, the comments were like a war zone of people being like, no, it's a dimension, or no, that's a retcon, and it's so confusing, and I'm baffled as to what they were really trying to do here. It's cool in execution, but in the grand scope of things, it doesn't work. Whatever the explanation, it adds yet another wrinkle to the already convoluted continuity. And I think that's kind of the crux of the issue in a broader sense. The MonsterVerse desperately needs a lore master of sorts. Someone like Kevin Feige to oversee the continuity, to smooth out the contradictions, and to ensure that the rules of this universe remain consistent from one entry to the next. Without that kind of oversight, I'm worried that the MonsterVerse will keep piling on new concepts without resolving the old ones, leading to a tangled mess of lore that's impossible to follow. Still, despite the confusion, I can't deny that the show's time subplot is so intriguing. There's a lot of potential for rich character-driven conflict in the way it plays with timelines, and it opens the door for some genuinely unique storytelling opportunities in Season 2. If they can build on that idea while reining in some of the franchise's more chaotic tendencies, Monarch Legacy of Monsters could become one of the strongest entries in the entire MonsterVerse. The character of Lee Shaw is without a doubt the most compelling part of the entire TV show. Every time he's on screen, it's impossible to look away, and a lot of that is thanks to the brilliant casting of Kurt and Wyatt Russell. Having a father and son portray the same character at different points in their life is such a clever idea. Kurt plays the older Shaw, while Wyatt takes on the younger version, and it works so seamlessly that I forget that it's a father and son doing this. At times I'm like, no, that's just Kurt Russell. Wyatt Russell in his own right has been building an impressive career for years. I first noticed him back in 2014 with his hilarious turn as Zook in 22 Jump Street, but it wasn't until Overlord that I actually started paying attention to how good he is. Seriously, Overlord is a phenomenal movie and I highly recommend checking it out. And then there is his standout role, the role that he's probably most well known for, I'd say, as John Walker, or U.S. Agent in the MCU. Specifically in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where he managed to bring so much nuance to a character that could have been really flat and forgettable. That performance alone has me looking forward to his return in the MCU's upcoming Thunderbolts. And for the longest time, I had no idea that he was related to Kurt Russell, but now, seeing them side by side in this series, it's like a aha moment. He's the spitting image of a younger Kurt Russell. Their combined performances as Lee Shaw in Monarch Legacy of Monsters, it's phenomenal. The charisma and the continuity between them make it feel like we're watching one person and not two actors. They're so good that I just kind of wish the whole show would have been completely about Shaw. I wanted everyone else to be relegated to being side characters. And speaking of, the rest of the cast is a bit of a mixed bag. Ren Watabe as Kentaro left a lot to be desired. His performance felt very phoned in and unconvincing, which is disappointing because his character is meant to be a central part of the story. Maybe he shines in other roles and other movies and TV shows, but here, not so much. On the other hand, Anna Sawai as Kate Randa was a standout. Her arc was well developed and compelling, and she carried a lot of the emotional weight of the series. Anders Holm as Bill Randa also turned in a very solid performance, but I couldn't help but feel like he was a bit miscast. The idea that his version of Bill becomes John Goodman's character in just 14 years is a tough pill to swallow. I get that the trauma of Keiko and Lee's supposed deaths were supposed to explain his drastic change, but it's still a stretch. That said, Holm did a great job with the material that he's given. Unfortunately, Kiersey Clemens as May was a lowlight for me. Her performance was definitely affected by the lackluster writing, which is a shame because she deserves so much better. I loved her in 2018's Hearts Beat Loud. But May as a character is just so one note, and I straight up hated her arc. She betrays her group for personal gain, and instead of facing any consequences for it, everyone just forgives her like it's no big deal. The show tries to justify her leaving Applied Experimental Technologies because of some moral conflict over her code being used, but it's handled so poorly that it comes off as her being upset about not getting proper credit for her work despite receiving a large salary with benefits. It's not until much later that the audience learns that the company experiments on animals, which just feels like an afterthought meant to retroactively justify her actions. I understand the subplot was meant to set up Apex Cybernetics and their role in Godzilla vs. Kong, but it was just so clumsily written that it felt like filler. Honestly, May and that entire Apex subplot could have been completely cut from the series and the story wouldn't have suffered at all. Eliza Lazowski as Duval was solid, but the character herself left me really puzzled. Apparently, Duval was supposed to be the maternal aunt of Ford Brody from the 2014 Godzilla film. I know. What? Don't get me wrong, I like that they are trying to connect a lot of these movies, but this connection was so poorly integrated that I completely missed it. It was completely meaningless. I had to look it up just to realize that it was even a thing. If it was mentioned in the show, then it must have been in some throwaway line that I completely missed. It's a strange connection that doesn't really go anywhere or doesn't add anything meaningful to the story. I don't know why they did it. Maybe they just wanted to connect the movies better. I don't know. The score by Leopold Ross, best known for his work on Black Mirror and Netflix's live-action Death Note, it nails the conspiratorial vibe of the entire show with a synthesizer-heavy electronic score that feels like something straight out of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's playbook. And yeah, I wrote that line and then I did some more research, and he works with Atticus Ross a lot, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I found out that he's Atticus Ross's brother. So that influence checks out. What really stands out, though, is how the score carves out its own identity. The classic Akira Ifukube Godzilla score doesn't make an appearance here. Not even a variation of it. But honestly, it's better for it. Instead of trying to pull a Junkie XL and rip off the iconic Ifukube score, Ross does his own thing.
Command wants to talk to you, so...
Nah,
yep.
I'm gonna do my own thing.
He crafts a sound that feels fresh and perfectly tailored to the show's tone. The result is a score that doesn't just support the series, it elevates it. Would it have been cool to hear the Godzilla theme? Yes, of course. But I think that with what they were trying to do here, it was perfect. Now, a lot of Godzilla fans might disagree with me on this one, but I genuinely loved every Titan introduced in the show. My personal favorite was the Ion Dragon. It reminded me of Gaios from the Gamera franchise, and I think a big part of why I loved it so much was the sequence where Bill and Keiko encounter it for the first time in the wreckage of the USS Lawton. That entire scene was incredible. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. The fact we don't get a good look at the Ion Dragon at first only adds to the horror. The Frost Vark was another awesome monster. Its frost breath is both visually stunning and horrifying, especially with how it's used to kill people in the series. The design is fantastic too. It's super unique and unlike anything else in the MonsterVerse. And then there's the Endoswarmer, which reminded me a lot of something out of Peter Jackson's King Kong movie. All the new Titans were just really well done, and I was impressed with how distinct they felt while still fitting into the MonsterVerse. Thank God they didn't just go, ah yes, here's our totally original kaiju that isn't just a ripoff of Kamanga. Thank you. Thank you for being original and actually making quality kaiju designs. I loved it. I can see why some Godzilla or MonsterVerse fans don't like this series though. It's pretty light on action, and it takes a slow burn, character-driven approach. That said, there is action. Godzilla fights the Ion Dragon in a really cool battle, but I don't think it's a fair complaint to dock the show for not having enough Godzilla or not having enough fights. This is a conspiracy thriller first and foremost. It's called Monarch Legacy of Monsters, not Godzilla Legacy of Monsters. The show is about fleshing out the world of the MonsterVerse, and that's what I expected, what I wanted, and exactly what I got. For the most part, the characters were moderately interesting with some very high highs and some very low lows. And I especially loved the scenes that were set in the 50s. The vibes in those sections were spot on, even if the writing was lackluster at times. There's definitely a filler episode here and there, like the episode where the characters go into San Francisco and they wander around for the entire episode. Bullshit. That should have been like a 20-minute long sequence in a different episode. There are so many points where it's like, oh, they might get caught that they're in here, and it's like, I don't care, guys. Move on. Despite that, the series felt big and legitimate. I was worried it might feel cheap, like a filler show that was just using the MonsterVerse name to get people to subscribe to Apple TV+. Thankfully, this feels like a big-budget blockbuster series, helped by some real star power like Kurt Russell and a brief John Goodman cameo, and consistently impressive special effects that honestly look better than what we got in Godzilla x Kong. Godzilla has never looked better here. The moment where he rises up out of the desert in this homage to Mothra vs. Godzilla is so awesome. I felt like Leonardo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I was like, that's a reference. That's a reference. One of my all-time favorite Godzilla shots, maybe ever, is the shot of him rising up out of the water and seeing the water like drip off of his like spines and seeing it like go down his back. It looks so cool. It's so detailed, and I adore it. Overall, Monarch Legacy of Monsters is a very solid show so far, with a very respectable first season. It has some problems, but I'm excited to see what Season 2 has in store. From my understanding, it's going to have much more of an emphasis on Kong, which could be really cool. In general, I have complete and total faith in whatever the creators end up doing with this series and these characters. If I had to make a wish list of sorts of what I want out of Season 2, I definitely want to see more original Titans. It would be great if they could establish some more villains for Kong to battle. I've mentioned this before in other videos, but Godzilla has an insanely packed rogues gallery, while Kong has dinosaurs and variations of other apes, whether that be the funny orange ape or the funny robot ape. Beyond that, I want to see more out of Keiko and her grandchildren. I think there's so much potential for all of them to go on adventures together. On top of that, I want May to have more to do and for her to have a better arc in Season 2. Kiersey Clemons is a great actress, and I just hope that the showrunners give her character more of a purpose. This is a series with a lot of potential that I hope doesn't get cancelled for some dumb reason, especially if Season 2 ends on a cliffhanger. With all of that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick, you're watching Firewind Media. This is just a small part of my massive Godzilla retrospective project where I review every single Godzilla movie and TV show. I've already talked about the first 3 Godzilla installments in the Monsterverse, so go and check those out as well as our other Godzilla video essays that are here on the channel. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.